Hey guys, tonight we're going on a slightly sticky, oddly aromatic journey back to medieval times, where the line between science, superstition, and pure imagination was blurrier than the morning fog over a sleepy village. Picture yourself trudging through a cobblestone street, the smell of wet hay and livestock lingering in the air, while women whispered secrets of their wombs into the ears of midwives, whose techniques today would make you squirm. You probably won't survive this without at least one raised eyebrow, because some of the methods they swore by make modern home pregnancy tests look like wizardry in a bottle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time. I want to know if anyone else is creeping into medieval absurdity from across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by noticing how seriously people took the signs of pregnancy. There were no pharmacies, no plastic sticks promising certainty. Instead, medieval women, or sometimes the men in their lives, because yes, they often insisted on getting involved, relied on methods that were part science, part superstition, and part what can only be described as culinary experimentation. Imagine barley and wheat seeds sprinkled in a bowl of Uranus that's ripened, then left by a warm hearth. The idea: if the barley sprouted, it meant a boy. If the wheat sprouted, a girl. If nothing sprouted, well, congratulations. You either had a failed test or some very uncooperative seeds. Historians still argue whether these tests actually had any predictive value, or if people simply wanted to believe whatever the seeds decided to do. You trudge further down this path and find yourself imagining the actual sensory experience, the smell of slightly fermented urine mixed with the earthy scent of barley, the warmth of the hearth pressing gently on your shoulders, the hushed murmurs of women watching their future children grow before them. It's all very tactile, very intimate, and very medieval. Somewhere nearby, a midwife might be stirring a potion that could include ingredients like powdered unicorn horn, or, more realistically, herbs like rue and pennyroyal. The ritual was just as important as the result. The very act of preparation created a space where anxiety, hope, and a little humor mingled. And humor was indeed a necessary survival skill. Imagine your neighbor accidentally confusing barley and wheat door using spoiled seed sand suddenly. The entire street is gossiping about phantom pregnancies and imaginary babies. It's a reminder that in these pre-modern communities, information spread quickly, often in the form of cautionary tales or comedic errors. You might chuckle quietly, thinking about how home tests today, with their little blue lines, feel like such a miracle compared to the medieval reliance on plant sprouting, frog behavior, or star charts. But the medieval mind was curious. There was a genuine desire to understand the mysteries of the body, even if their methods now make us wince or giggle. They weren't lazy, they just lacked microscopes, chemistry labs, and sterile plastic. Instead, they had observation, folklore, and a profound connection to nature. Barley, urine, wine, frogs. Each item was a bridge between the known and the unknown, the tangible and the mystical. You can almost feel the tension in a medieval kitchen, the hush as a woman waits to see if her seeds will sprout. A midwife holding her breath, the room thick with expectation and the faint smell of hay and herbs. And as you imagine this, it's tempting to mock, but also to admire. The creativity, the resourcefulness, the willingness to turn everyday objects into predictive tools. There's something undeniably human there. You notice that even the most absurd methods had patterns, rituals, and logic, however skewed by superstition. And somewhere in this mix, the medieval communities were negotiating control over one of life's biggest uncertainties, the potential for new life and the stories that would grow alongside it. So tonight, as we wander through these slightly pungent, slightly ridiculous corridors of history, prepare yourself to witness the sheer ingenuity and occasional absurdity of medieval pregnancy tests. You'll smell, you'll imagine, you might even grimace, but above all you'll get a sense of how deeply humans have always wanted to peek behind the curtain of the womb, long before plastic sticks or urine strips made things convenient. You trudge into a cramped, sun-dappled medieval kitchen, where earthen pots line the shelves like soldiers waiting for orders. The scent of damp clay mingles with the faint tang of stored grains, and somewhere in the corner, a small pile of barley and wheat seeds waits for its moment of destiny. You probably won't survive this without at least a few raised eyebrows, because the method you're about to witness is equal parts biology, superstition, and sheer audacity. Back then, one of the most popular pregnancy tests relied entirely on seeds. The idea was simple enough. Place barley and wheat seeds in a woman's urine. Keep them somewhere warm, and observe which sprouted first. Barley for a boy, wheat for a girl. No sprouts, either disappointment or divine mystery. Historians still argue whether the seed's growth had any correlation with conception or if the results were purely coincidence. You crouch over the pot, noticing the granular texture of the barley and wheat, the way the tiny seeds glisten slightly in the yellowish liquid, and you almost wince at the olfactory assault. Urine in a clay pot isn't exactly perfumed, and medieval homes didn't exactly boast running water to rinse things clean. The procedure required patience, trust, and a willingness to gamble with your hopes and fears. You might imagine young women peeking at their pots early in the morning, straining to see the faint green sprout of barley pushing through the damp soil of their container, each tiny shoot a message from the gods or from biology, if you're feeling skeptical. And then there was the social aspect. Testing wasn't always a private affair. Midwives often facilitated the procedure, guiding women through the ritual with solemn gestures. Or sometimes townspeople gossiped from behind half-open doors, eager for news about pregnancies and gender outcomes. You feel the weight of community pressure, the hope and the anxiety swirling around these humble pots. It's almost charming in its intensity, until you remember the smell, and then not so charming anymore. Some accounts even suggest that the test was taken multiple times during early pregnancy, as if repeated sprouting attempts could reveal changes in fetal development. Imagine the medieval equivalent of hitting refresh on your favorite app bud with seeds and urine instead of Wi-Fi. The logic, oddly, made sense to them. Seeds respond to warmth, moisture, and nutrients, just as humans respond to conditions in the womb. You can almost hear a midwife whispering, "We must observe nature's sin carefully, and patience will reveal the truth." Yet, of course, not every seed would cooperate. Spoiled seeds, cold rooms, or unripe barley could ruin the prophecy entirely, leaving anxious women and midwives scratching their heads. It wasn't all dry observation, though. Some texts suggest little rituals to encourage seed growth, spinning the pot 3 times, whispering the mother's name, or even blessing the seeds with holy water. You probably wouldn't survive this level of superstition today without a smirk. But back then, it was standard procedure. Quirky, yes, but also emblematic of how humans have always tried to control the unpredictable, whether by science, ritual, or charm, and humor crept in naturally. You imagine a midwife nudging a reluctant sprout with a tiny stick, or a neighbor declaring, "The barley failed, surely a girl," only to have the woman later give birth to a boy, shattering expectations and launching 100 whispered debates. Medieval communities weren't just testing seeds, they were testing patience, trust, and imagination. You lean back and absorb it all. The texture of the seeds, the warmth of the pot, the hushed suspense. Earthen pots and barley weren't just tools, they were symbols of hope, of human curiosity, and of a society navigating life with whatever means they had. And as you picture these tiny green shoots nudging their way out of urine-soaked clay, you can't help but admire the strange, earnest ingenuity of medieval people who trusted seeds to reveal life's most private secret. You trudge deeper into the medieval household, this time drawn to the small, dimly lit corner where a goblet of dark, slightly foamy liquid waits. It smells faintly of vinegar. Maybe because it is wine, or perhaps that's just your imagination struggling to mask the pungency of human urine. You probably won't survive this scene without wincing slightly, because the method about to unfold combines bodily fluids and alcohol in a way that modern sensibilities would call bold. Yes, in some medieval circles, pregnancy testing involved soaking a woman's urine in wine and watching for subtle transformations. The reasoning was both practical and mystical. Changes in odor, color, or foam were interpreted as messages from the body or the cosmos. Historians still argue whether this practice ever had any real predictive value, or if it merely reflected communal belief in the powers of fermentation and bodily magic. You lean in, imagining a midwife carefully pouring the amber-hued liquid into a small cup, adding a few drops of local wine, and observing the reaction with an intensity that makes you question your own patience. The smell is sharp, metallic, slightly sweet, and undeniably alive. You can practically hear the midwife whispering incantations or offering advice, maybe warning, "Patience, my dear." The liquid speaks in its own time, and you notice how tactile this ritual is. The warmth of the goblet in the hands, the slow swirl of the liquid, the faint sound of settling sediment. Every sensory cue was considered a clue, a visual, olfactory, and tactile signal rolled into one. Some sources even suggest that if the liquid frothed or bubbled after the urine was added, pregnancy was assumed. The froth itself might have been influenced by impurities, temperature, or even the type of wine, but to the medieval mind, it was a secret language waiting to be deciphered. You can't help but chuckle a little, imagining women and midwives huddled over tiny goblets, intently watching a bubble rise, debating quietly whether it signaled a boy, a girl, or perhaps just a misbehaving beverage. Quirky, yes, but somehow utterly human. And then there was the fringe side, of the practice. Some texts claim that a stronger aroma indicated a more vigorous pregnancy, or that the liquid S taste could hint at the mother S temperament, or even the child S future personality. You can almost see a group of women passing the cup around, each adding their own interpretation while suppressing giggles at the absurdity. Historians still argue whether these tests were ever standardized, or if each region and midwife had her own secret recipe, blending folklore, intuition, and sheer bravado. Despite the sensory assault smells, colors, froth, you notice that this ritual, like the barley test, was about more than accuracy. It was about giving shape to uncertainty, providing hope, and creating a moment of communal suspense. It's almost theatrical. The wine swirls, the liquid reacts, and everyone waits, suspended in that strange mix of science, superstition, and human longing. You imagine the soft murmurs of anticipation, the subtle nods of midwives, and the occasional raised eyebrow of a skeptical observer. Humor, of course, lingered in the margins. A goblet might foam too enthusiastically, prompting laughter and mock dramatic declarations, or produce no sign at all, leading to whispered bets about the outcome. It's a reminder that medieval people, while serious about understanding life's mysteries, had a playful streak they could hope, guess, and joke all at once. You find yourself appreciating the tactile, sensory-rich engagement of the process, the warmth of hands, the aroma of fermented liquid, the suspense of tiny frothing bubbles, all part of a ritual designed to bridge the gap between uncertainty and knowledge. And as you breathe in this odd mixture of history, scent, and story, you realize the medieval fascination with bodily reactions wasn't just superstition, it was curiosity incarnate. Every bubble, every froth, every subtle shift in color was a clue in a puzzle they were determined to solve. And even if modern science scoffs, there's a strange poetry in how humans have always tried to listen to their bodies. Long before the convenience of digital tests or plastic strips, you trudge further down the narrow, uneven corridor of medieval curiosity, your footsteps echoing softly against stone walls that have witnessed centuries of human ingenuity, superstition, and occasional chaos. The smell of damp earth mingles with the lingering aroma of herbs, urine, and the faint temps of aged parchment. You probably won't survive this next tale without blinking in disbelief, because now you re-stepping into a world where animals played detective in the most intimate of human affairs. Frogs, rabbits, even pigeons, creatures of the common countryside, were enlisted in the quest to reveal whether a woman was with child. The methods might seem absurd to modern sensibilities, but to medieval communities, animals were believed to sense life and communicate hidden truths through behavior. Historians still argue whether these tests were symbolic, practical, or simply amusing ways to cope with uncertainty. Picture a small basket lined with straw, a tiny rabbit placed inside, and a woman's urine applied in some ritualistic fashion, perhaps dabbed on the straw or dropped into a shallow dish nearby. The rabbit's movements, or its apparent refusal to eat, were carefully noted. Some midwives claimed that if the rabbit avoided the urine, it indicated pregnancy. If it seemed indifferent, the woman was not expecting. You can almost hear the whispered murmurs. The creature feels what we cannot see. There was a quiet reverence in these observations, even if modern eyes see only randomness. Frogs, on the other hand, were considered even more reliable by some. A common test involved placing a frog in a jar with a woman's urine and observing its behavior. Jumping, croaking, or moving away in a specific direction could supposedly reveal the sex of the unborn child. Imagine crouching low to watch a frog hop about, while the midwife scribbles notes on parchment, interpreting each twitch and hop with solemn intensity. Some accounts suggest that priests or monks were even consulted to bless the frog, infusing the test with a sacred undertone. Quirky as it sounds, these rituals reflect a culture in which observation, superstition, and symbolism intertwined seamlessly. You pause for a moment and notice the sensory overload: the damp straw, the earthy odor of rabbits, the sharp, slightly metallic scent of urine, and the almost comical chorus of croaking frogs. It's tactile, olfactory, visual, a full-body engagement that somehow grounded the anxiety and hope surrounding pregnancy. Humor naturally seeped in, especially when animals defied expectations. Perhaps a rabbit refused to move at all, or a frog jumped enthusiastically, only to contradict later births. Communities would sigh, shrug, and debate endlessly, weaving these anomalies into folklore and moral lessons. Historians still argue whether any method involving animals had a measurable success rate, or if the outcomes were purely anecdotal. And let's not forget the social dimension. These tests often happened in the communal space of the village, where curious neighbors might peek through half-closed doors, offering commentary or hushed laughter. One can imagine a gaggle of women quietly betting on the outcome, each interpretation adding another layer to the ritual. Even in failure, the tests reinforced connections, provided entertainment, and allowed collective participation in one of life's most private mysteries. You might smirk, realizing that medieval people treated biology like theater, blending suspense, comedy, and drama all at once. Some texts even suggest that pigeons were occasionally used, carried to midwives, with small notes or signs indicating their reactions. If a pigeon cooed in a particular way or refused a perch, it was seen as a clue. The ritualistic aspect: raising birds, observing minute behaviors, interpreting subtle gestures, transformed ordinary animals into conduits for mystical insight. And yet, beneath the whimsy, there was an earnest desire to understand the human body, a reflection of curiosity, care, and community bonds. You imagine leaning in closer, watching a rabbit twitch its nose, a frog croak mid-leap, the midwife's fingers tracing subtle patterns in straw, her lips moving in quiet incantation. Even if nothing comes of the test, the act itself was comforting, a ritualized acknowledgement of uncertainty. Humor surfaces again when the animal behaves unpredictably: a rabbit that refuses to react, a frog that leaps straight into the urine pool, causing startled squeals and suppressed laughter. Medieval communities thrived on these little performances. And while modern science would scoff, there's a strange poetry in how humans have always sought signs from the natural world. And as you step back mentally, the images of straw, rabbits, and frogs linger, leaving an odd sense of reverence for their inventiveness. You begin to appreciate that the medieval world wasn't merely gullible, it was imaginative, sensory-rich, and deeply invested in connecting ordinary objects and creatures to life's profound mysteries. From the twitch of a rabbit's nose to the leap of a frog, every detail was a potential sign. Every motion, a message from the hidden, mysterious realm of conception. And in that moment, watching the ritual unfold, you understand medieval pregnancy tests weren't just diagnostic. They were an entire theater of hope, humor, and human ingenuity rolled into a damp, straw-scented corner of the world. You trudge into another corner of medieval domestic life, where the scent of flour, dust, and yeasty bread mingles with something a bit more pungent, the ever-present odor of urine. Of course, you probably won't survive this next chapter without a shiver of disbelief, because now we're venturing into the kitchen as a site of scientific inquiry, or at least quasi-scientific intuition. Believe it or not, bread and dough were enlisted as early pregnancy detectors. Women, or sometimes their midwives, would mix flour and water into a small loaf or cake, adding a dash of urine and leaving it to rise. If the dough rose successfully, it was interpreted as a sign of pregnancy. If it failed, well, you get the idea. Historians still argue whether this method had any correlation with actual conception, or if it was simply another imaginative experiment in a world without microscopes. You watch the process unfold in your mind. The flour is soft and powdery beneath your fingertips, the water adding a cool, slick texture, and the urine, inevitably warm and slightly acrid, mixes in with an oddly tangible sense of ceremony. The dough is kneaded carefully, not just with hands, but with intention, almost as if it were a participant in the divination itself. You notice the suspense in the air, the quiet focus as the midwife for mother or neighbor watches for signs of rising. Every bubble, every shift in texture is a message from nature and the body combined, a tiny miracle that speaks of potential life. Some medieval manuals suggest variations, sprinkling herbs, adding eggs, or placing the dough near a warm hearth for extra encouragement. The warmth of the fire, the smell of cooking bread, the quiet anticipational sensory cues formed an immersive experience. You probably can't help but imagine a small, anxious crowd leaning over the loaf, each interpreting its height, softness, or stickiness in their own way. Humor, naturally, was a part of the ritual. A dough that refused to rise could trigger whispered jokes, sympathetic sighs, or even playful curses toward uncooperative grains. Bread-based tests weren't limited to women alone. Some recipes instructed midwives to make parallel loaves for multiple women, comparing results side by side. It's almost like a medieval version of a taste test, but with far higher stakes and far stranger ingredients. And scholars still debate whether these tests were ever standardized, or if each region, family, or practitioner had her own secret recipe, combining culinary skill, intuition, and superstition. You notice how tactile and multisensory the test was. Kneading the dough, feeling its texture, smelling the mixture, watching tiny bubbles expand, its action-connected body, mind, and ritual. It's oddly intimate, even if the urine element makes you wince. The test blends domesticity with medical curiosity, showing how life, sustenance, and the mysteries of reproduction were inseparable in medieval thought. Some accounts even suggest that the type of flour mattered. Barley, wheat, or rye might be chosen according to local customs or beliefs about fertility. The rise or collapse of the dough was read not only as a sign of pregnancy, but sometimes as a reflection of the expected child's temperament. Soft dough meant a gentle baby. Dense dough meant strength and stubbornness. You probably can't survive that without smiling at their creativity, though modern science would roll its eyes. And as the small loaf expands gently near the hearth, the smell of baking bread mingling with the underlying temps of urine, you realize how fully medieval people wove the ordinary into the extraordinary. Kitchens weren't just places to cook. They were laboratories, theaters, and temples of hope. Each loaf needed, each bubble watched, was a dance between patience, superstition, and imagination, a moment where human desire to understand life and to glimpse the unseen manifested in tactile, deliciously absurd ways. You step back and inhale deeply, picturing the rising loaves, the hushed whispers, the suppressed giggles, and the community gathered quietly around this unusual oracle. It's sensory, it's humorous, and it's profoundly human. The bread test, like the barley, the wine, and the rabbits, is a reminder that even in the absence of microscopes or plastic sticks, people found ways to wrest meaning from the mysterious. It's messy, it's fragrant, it's awkward, and yet it's an earnest attempt to navigate uncertainty with whatever tools and humor they had at hand. You trudge into yet another corner of the medieval imagination, where superstition meets the tangible weight of objects in your hands. Tonight, it's not seeds, urine, or dough that will hint at pregnancy. It's charms, amulets, and trinkets that jingle with purpose and promise. You probably won't survive this without a faint chuckle, because the tests relied on tiny metal, string, or stone, believed to carry secret knowledge about a woman's womb. Midwives, wise women, or sometimes local clergy would guide these rituals, hanging pendants over the abdomen, dangling rings on threads, or whispering incantations to coax the future into revealing itself. Historians still argue whether these tests were ever about detecting pregnancy at all, or more about providing psychological reassurance to anxious families. You picture a midwife kneeling beside a young woman, a silver ring tied to a thread, swinging gently above her belly. The rule is straightforward, at least it seems. If the ring swings in a certain pattern, then pregnancy is confirmed. If it swings differently, no child is expected. You notice the tactile precision of the ritual, the soft weight of the ring, the gentle pressure of hands on the abdomen, the faint smell of worn metal or leather cord. It's surprisingly intimate, like the body itself is being consulted through subtle vibrations and gravity. There's a rhythm, a patience to the act, a slow cadence that invites both belief and speculation. Other charms included small stones inscribed with symbols, herbs tied in delicate bundles, or even miniature figurines, each placed strategically to observe reactions or simply to protect the mother and child. Some versions were purely performative, like pendulums swinging over embroidered cloth, with the midwife interpreting angles, arcs, and direction. You probably can't survive picturing multiple women in a dimly lit room, each with their own tiny talisman, threads crisscrossing in the air like invisible spiderwebs of fate. Yet it wasn't all absurdity. The act itself brought comfort, structure, and focus. The mind loves patterns, even if the patterns are conjured from superstition, and humor, as always, sneaks in quietly. Sometimes the pendulum would spin wildly, a sudden jerk or unexpected twist, prompting laughter or mock exclamations. It seems your child is a spirited one already. Other times, the thread might tangle, the charm slip, or the stone-fall interpretations were quick, witty, and endlessly flexible. These moments of levity softened the anxiety surrounding the uncertainty of pregnancy, turning a tense ritual into a shared human experience. Historians still argue whether such practices were more effective as psychological tools than as diagnostic methods. Beyond individual charm tests, some midwives used collections of amulets, arranging them around the home or even hanging them near hearths and doorways, believing that their subtle energies would reveal pregnancy or protect both mother and child. The room would fill with scent from herbs, weight from metal, and soft whisperings as observers speculated on outcomes. It's tactile, olfactory, visual a ritual that engaged all the senses and connected community members through shared belief. The pendulums, charms, and amulets also served as social markers. A woman's collection, or the midwife's array of tools, often indicated her experience, her family's status, or even regional customs. You can imagine a subtle rivalry, whose talisman works fastest, whose charm swings truest. Laughter, gossip, and reassurance mingled in these rooms, creating an atmosphere that was as much about connection as it was about prediction. And as you take it all in the glint of metal, the swing of pendulums, the whispering murmurs, you recognize the medieval mind's ingenuity. It wasn't simply superstition. It was creativity applied to life's uncertainties. These charms and amulets bridged the gap between what was known and what was feared, offering both comfort and a sense of control. Swinging above a woman's belly, vibrating in invisible rhythms, they transformed the intangible mystery of pregnancy into something you could see, touch, and interpret, a magical, tactile conversation between humans and the unseen. You trudge into a shadowy, herb-scented chamber, the air thick with the aroma of dried plants and the faintly sharp temps of urine lingering like a stubborn ghost. You probably won't survive this next method without a mix of fascination and mild horror, because medieval pregnancy tests often relied on herbal and plant potions that were equal parts alchemy, superstition, and guesswork. Midwives, healers, or wise women would concoct brews from rue, pennyroyal, mugwort, or sometimes more obscure ingredients, believing that a woman's reaction, be it nausea, dizziness, or sudden energy, revealed whether she was carrying a child. Historians still argue whether any of these botanical tests had physiological basis, or if they functioned primarily as ritualized reassurance. Imagine yourself watching a midwife grinding leaves between her fingers, releasing a pungent, slightly bitter aroma that makes you wrinkle your nose. She measures carefully, sometimes adding a few drops of warm water, occasionally stirring with a carved wooden stick. The mixture might be ingested, dabbed on the abdomen, or placed near the nose, each approach claiming to provoke a sign. Sensory detail is key here. The taste is sharp, almost metallic, the smell earthy and slightly acrid, and the texture gritty yet wet. The act itself demands patience, attentiveness, and a willingness to suspend modern skepticism long enough to imagine the plant revealing secrets. Some potions were even layered with symbolism. Rue, for example, was associated with protection and purification, while pennyroyal was thought to affect the womb in mystical ways. You can almost hear the whispered instructions: let the leaves speak, and the body will answer. Observers would note subtle reactions, twitches, sneezes, a grimace, or a sudden sigh as signs of pregnancy. Humor was never far away. A woman might pretend a reaction for dramatic effect, or a curious child could spill ingredients, sending the potion bubbling and foaming unexpectedly. Historians still argue whether these tests were ever applied consistently or varied wildly according to local custom, healer whim, or ingredient availability. And you can't ignore the performative element. Brewing the potion, observing reactions, and interpreting results created a shared experience of suspense, connection, and gentle theatricality. Communities often treated these rituals as both diagnostic and educational, teaching younger women about herbs, body awareness, and social etiquette, all while navigating the unknown. You might smirk at the absurdity, but you also sense the deeply human desire to control uncertainty using whatever tools were at hand. Some sources suggest that certain concoctions were designed more to provoke dramatic reaction than to test pregnancy accurately. A strong herbal smell could induce nausea in anyone, making the body act as if it were signaling a yes, even when it wasn't. And yet, the midwife's presence, her careful observation, and the ritualized steps lent legitimacy and comfort. Imagine a small wooden table lined with mortar, pestles, dried leaves, and cups. The room hushed except for whispered murmurs and the occasional cough. It's tactile, olfactory, and visually rich, almost like theater in miniature. Humor again seeps into these moments. A brew might bubble over, staining garments, or a woman might recoil in exaggerated fashion, prompting chuckles. Some midwives even embellished reactions, claiming the potion has spoken, while observers nodded solemnly or stifled laughter. The intersection of herbs, human response, and social ritual created a landscape that was both absurd and profoundly connective. And as you lean back in your imagination, inhaling the sharp scent of rue and pennyroyal, you realize that medieval herbal tests, like barley seeds or swinging pendulums, were not just attempts at prediction. They were exercises in observation, patience, and community engagement. Every twitch, every reaction, every bitter taste was a tiny story of hope, anxiety, and human ingenuity. The body, the plant, and the observer became entwined in a delicate dance of interpretation, a quiet acknowledgement that life's mysteries were worth exploring in every way imaginable. You trudge into a brighter room this time, warmed by the morning sun spilling through narrow windows, where the focus shifts from plants and potions to the human body itself. You probably won't survive this next approach without squirming a little, because medieval pregnancy tests increasingly relied on touch, pulse, and other physical signs of tactile investigation that combined observation, intuition, and an oddly intimate social contract. Midwives, with hands seasoned by years of practice, would palpate the abdomen, feel for subtle changes in the body, and sometimes even read the pulse, claiming that these signs could indicate whether a woman was expecting. Historians still argue whether such methods ever provided reliable information, or if they were largely interpretive art guided by experience, community expectation, and perhaps a touch of hope. You imagine yourself sitting quietly as a midwife approaches, her hands warm and practiced. She places a gentle palm over your lower abdomen, feeling the soft rise and fall of muscles and the subtle shifts that might betray early life within. tracing invisible lines and listening to her own sense of rhythm as much as any physiological signal. Her concentration is palpable, the room filled with a quiet tension, broken only by occasional whispers or the distant clatter of a spinning wheel. Touch is central here, a language without words, and each movement is a conversation between midwife and body. Some midwives also relied on pulse reading, resting fingers delicately on the wrist while noting changes in rhythm, warmth, or tension. A faster beat might signify excitement, a slower one, perhaps contentment, or, in the mystical logic of the time, pregnancy. You notice the sensory richness, the gentle pressure of hands, the warmth of another human so close, the quiet stillness that allows observation to sharpen. There's a theater in the ordinary, a drama unfolding with each soft touch. Humor often lightened the tension. A midwife might feign alarm at a normal twitch or exaggerate the pulse, prompting a nervous giggle or an eye roll. Historians still argue whether tactile signs, pulse readings, or abdominal palpation had any predictive accuracy at all in early pregnancy, or if they served primarily to structure social hua rituals and provide reassurance. Sometimes the practice was blended with ritual. Hands might be washed in warm water infused with herbs, or anointing oils might be applied to enhance sensitivity. The midwife's experience dictated how each movement was interpreted, from the tiniest twitch to the subtle rise of the lower belly. You can almost hear her muttering under her breath, noting small changes, interpreting each as a clue in the larger puzzle of life. While family members watch quietly, hushed by the gravity of the moment, and humor, inevitably, accompanies even these intimate procedures. A ticklish belly could provoke laughter, disrupting concentration and giving the room a light, human energy. Some women exaggerated reactions to see how the midwife would respond, or to tease nearby observers. This tactile, sensory-rich approach was as much about social bonding as it was about prediction. It connected women and midwives through touch, trust, and shared suspense, reinforcing community in the midst of uncertainty. You notice the layered complexity, the rhythm of the pulse, the subtle rise of muscles, the warmth of hands, the soft whispers of instruction and reassurance, all combine to form a deeply human method of inquiry, one that relied on observation, empathy, and a profound awareness of the body. Unlike seeds or potions, this method demanded presence and attentiveness, an immersion in both the physical and emotional state of the woman. Even today, you can appreciate the skill required, the patience demanded, and the courage it took to place one's body into another's hands with trust, hope, and curiosity. By the time you step back in your imagination, the room has quieted, leaving only the soft impression of touch, the faint warmth of lingering hands, and the memory of a ritual that made the invisible visible through the subtle language of the body. You realize medieval people were intensely observant, blending practical skills with social intuition, humor, and ritual, turning every gesture into a conversation with life's most profound mystery. You trudge into a dimly lit apothecary, where shelves sag under the weight of jars, powders, and strange dried creatures pressed between parchment. You probably won't survive this next method without a shiver, because medieval pregnancy tests sometimes involved magical mixtures that blurred the line between medicine and occult practice. Midwives and local healers often relied on animal parts, mineral powders, and mystical incantations, believing that subtle reactions could reveal pregnancy. For example, the reaction of a concoction containing frankincense, powdered coral, or even small bits of snakeskin to a woman's urine might indicate conception. Historians still argue whether such tests were based on observation, symbolic meaning, or purely ritualistic belief. You lean in, imagining the textures and smells, gritty powders, resinous frankincense, the acrid bite of urine, and the faint, musty odor of long-stored animal bits. The midwife stirs carefully, her hand steady, eyes trained on the liquid as it changes subtly in color, viscosity, or the formation of froth. Each observation is interpreted with solemnity, as if the mixture itself contains the knowledge of life. You notice how tactile the ritual is. Fingers trace the edge of a pot, the spoon clinks softly against ceramic, and a small, almost imperceptible vibration might signal something or nothing at all. Some rituals involved holding a concoction near the abdomen or having the woman inhale aromatic fumes, with reactions ranging from dizziness to sneezing, interpreted as confirmation. Humor inevitably entered. A sneeze too forceful might be declared sign of twins, or a reactionless woman could provoke whispered jokes about stubborn children. These methods were sensory, rich, theatrical, and deeply human in their attempt to wrest knowledge from mystery. Historians still argue whether these tests were ever applied consistently or varied wildly depending on the practitioner's experience and local custom. You can almost see a table laid with ingredients, small bones, dried herbs, powdered minerals, and vials of strange liquids. The midwife's hands move with purpose, adding drops, stirring gently, observing every shift. Each moment is charged with anticipation, as the woman waits to see if the mixture reacts in alchemical ballet, blending science, superstition, and social ritual. It's messy, it's aromatic, it's tactile, and it demands patience. The social dimension is unmistakable. These tests often occurred in the presence of family members or neighbors who whispered, speculated, and sometimes provided comic commentary. Laughter and suspense mingled in the air as predictions were made, correct or otherwise. You notice how much trust was involved. A woman's body, the mystical concoction, the midwife's interpretation, all intertwined in a delicate dance of observation, intuition, and communal expectation. Some texts even describe the use of divination tools alongside these concoctions, such as casting bones, observing shadows, or interpreting patterns in smoke or froth. Each added layer reinforced the ritual's importance and extended the sensory engagement site. Smell, touch, even sound in the form of clinking or bubbling. Humor again surfaced when ingredients failed spectacularly, spilled onto the floor, or produced unexpected reactions. And as you step back and imagine the aromatic, visual, and tactile tapestry of this apothecary ritual, you realize that medieval people were deeply inventive. They merged observation, symbolism, and sensory engagement to confront uncertainty, to glimpse the invisible, and to create moments of shared human experience. These mystical concoctions weren't just tests, they were stories, performances, and attempts to control a world that felt both wondrous and perilous. The powders, liquids, and tiny animal bits became instruments through which people reached toward knowledge, hope, and sometimes a little comic relief. You trudge onward into the candlelit hush of a small medieval chapel, where the scent of beeswax mingles with incense, and the faint echo of chanting hangs in the air. You probably won't survive this next method without raising an eyebrow, because medieval pregnancy testing wasn't confined to herbs or midwives. Sit sometimes wandered into the sacred halls of religion itself. For many in the Middle Ages, divine intervention wasn't just possible, it was the ultimate diagnostic tool. When medicine failed, or when uncertainty felt unbearable, women turned to faith. They prayed before relics, laid offerings at saints' shrines, and even subjected themselves to holy sign tests, hoping that heaven would whisper a yes or no. Historians still argue whether these rituals were acts of desperation or sincere expressions of spiritual logic in an age before biology could answer with certainty. You can almost hear the rustle of wool skirts as women kneel before flickering candles, their hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the stone saints above them. A priest murmurs Latin phrases. A silver chalice gleams nearby, its surface catching faint light. The air feels thick with incense and quiet pleading. Some believed that if a woman dreamt of holding a child after praying, it was confirmation from the divine. Others thought that if her candle flame burned steadily, without flickering it, was a sign of pregnancy. And if the wax dripped in a certain pattern, that too became a clue. One popular ritual involved the Mass of Saint Margaret, the patron saint of childbirth. Women would drink water that had been poured over her relics or touched by her statue, believing it revealed the truth within days. The taste of the water, sometimes metallic, sometimes floral from petals left floating overnight, was said to carry a divine vibration. You imagine taking a cautious sip, the chill of the cup against your lips, the faint bitterness that settles at the back of your tongue, and the whispered hope that heaven might answer through that sensation. Humor sometimes crept in, as it always did in the medieval world. Imagine a candle that refused to stay lit. Was it divine disapproval, or just a drafty chapel? A priest might frown deeply, declaring it a spiritual sign, while the gathered women exchanged amused glances. Or, if a relic water tasted too earthy, someone might quip that the saint had a peculiar palate. Even within the solemnity, laughter flickered like a flame that refused to die out. Yet beneath the jokes lay an ache of uncertainty. Pregnancy was both a blessing and a danger, and women sought reassurance in any form they could find. Religious tests offered not only potential answers, but comfort. To believe that a saint had spoken, however faintly, was to feel less alone. The rituals became communal acts of shared vulnerability. The chapel, a safe space where doubt could be laid down, if only for a moment. Some chroniclers record even stranger practices. Women would place small loaves of blessed bread beneath their pillows, waiting for prophetic dreams. Others might carry consecrated rings, believed to warm or cool depending on divine verdict. Historians still argue whether these rituals were widely practiced or isolated to specific regions and monastic circles. But their consistency across centuries suggests that faith-based diagnostics carried powerful emotional weight. The sensory details remain vivid. You can feel the cool stone floor beneath your knees, hear the faint creak of wood as the priest moves, Smell the mingling of incense and old stone. A drop of wax lands softly on your hand, warm at first, then cooling into stillness. In that moment, you realize how deeply medieval people trusted in patterns, symbols, and sensation to interpret divine will. These rituals also reinforced gendered dynamics. The Church framed motherhood as sacred duty, so pregnancy wasn't merely biological, it was theological. Tests that invoked saints and relics thus became moral affirmations as much as physical ones. If the signs pointed yes, it meant not just new life, but divine favor. If no, perhaps more prayer or more patience was required. Still, within that heavy theology, humor and human frailty persisted. A woman might doze off during the ritual, snoring softly while her candle burned perfectly straticide. Surely, that saints had a sense of humor, too. Or the wax might spill in a way that looked suspiciously like an animal, prompting gentle teasing from the women around her. In that laughter, the line between sacred and human blurred. You lean back in your imagination, candlelight flickering across ancient stone, and realize that these religious pregnancy rituals were not so different from the barley seeds or pendulums that came before. All of them, in their own way, were attempts to touch mystery, to grasp life's hidden rhythms through whatever symbols made sense. The chapel offered structure where chaos reigned, hope where fear lived. By the time you leave that quiet space, the candles are low, the air faintly smoky, and the stone beneath your feet cool. You glance back once, half expecting the saint's statue to nod knowingly. Perhaps it does, in the wavering light. Whether divine truth or comforting illusion, the ritual has served its purpose, to soothe the anxious heart, to weave belief into the fabric of the body, and to remind you that even uncertainty can be beautiful when dressed in faith and candlelight. You trudge out of the chapel and into the crisp morning air, only to find that the search for medieval pregnancy truth didn't end with saints and relics. You probably, survive this next part without raising both eyebrows, because some of the strangest tests were rooted not in religion or medicine, but in what you might call proto-science, a kind of early experimental curiosity that looked suspiciously like chemistry's awkward childhood. Alchemists, physicians, and curious scholars tried to turn pregnancy into a measurable event, complete with fumes, metals, and even animal reactions. Historians still argue whether these early experiments paved the way for genuine medical science, or were simply another blend of superstition and sensory theater. You imagine entering a small, cluttered alchemist's workshop. The air feels heavy, tinged with the scent of sulfur and vinegar. Candles sputter against the damp walls, illuminating glass vessels and hammered metal bowls. The table in front of you glistens with droplets from recent mixing, clear, yellowish, some slightly steaming. The alchemist, perhaps a monk with ink-stained fingers, squints at a vial containing a woman's urine mixed with powdered metals, watching for color changes. The logic went like this. Different bodily states produced different chemical reactions. If the liquid darkened, clouded, or gave off a particular odor, conception was confirmed. You take an imaginary whiff and immediately regret it. The fumes are acrid, metallic, with a bite like rotten eggs and vinegar. Humor helps you through the thought. Medieval people might not have known about hydrogen sulfide, but they certainly knew when something smelled suspiciously pregnant. One recorded test mixed urine with iron filings and vinegar. The resulting color shift was said to reveal hidden life. You can almost hear the bubbling, the hiss of reaction, the cautious hum of anticipation. Sometimes these alchemical pregnancy labs involved even stranger materials: crushed pearls, ground coral, or ashes of burnt linen mixed with wine. The concoction was often boiled gently over a candle flame or set aside overnight for observation. If a strange crust formed, it was taken as a sign. If not, perhaps the heavens weren't cooperating. Historians still argue whether any of these tests had accidental merit after all. Changes in urine composition can happen during pregnancy, but consistency was, at best, imaginary. You picture a small audience, the woman perhaps veiled for modesty, the alchemist gesturing dramatically, a curious servant peeking in through the door. The atmosphere is equal parts laboratory and theater. Each reaction, color, smell, or fizzes met with murmurs of awe or relief. Humor bubbles beneath the surface. Imagine a curious cat knocking over a beaker, prompting the alchemist to declare, "Ah, a sign of twins." The line between serious observation and absurdity blurs delightfully. In another variation, live animals were used as test subjects. A woman's urine might be poured onto wheat bran, fed to a small animal. If the creature grew restless or sickly, it supposedly meant pregnancy. Some even tested urine on spiders, watching their web patterns for divine clues. You can't help but chuckle at the image. A room full of solemn scholars watching a confused spider, trying to interpret its artistic choices as biological data. Historians still argue whether such experiments were widespread or merely curiosities among eccentric thinkers. But the records suggest they were taken quite seriously by some. The sensory world of these tests is rich: metal scraping, liquids fizzing, faint smoke curling upward, and the mixed perfume of vinegar, herbs, and human fear. Even as you smile at the absurdity, you sense the earnestness. These people were desperate for knowledge, for certainty, for a glimpse of life's hidden processes. They stood on the cusp of discovery, one foot in magic, the other in emerging science. Humor often softened the tension. When a mixture changed color unpredictably, someone might blame the moon, or claim that the unborn child had stolen the alchemist's patience. And yet, amid the laughter, there was awe. These experiments, however misguided, marked humanity's first steps toward empirical thinking. They turned pregnancy from a mystical guess into something that could be observed, tested, debated. You lean closer in imagination, hearing the faint hiss of reaction and the slow exhale of the alchemist. His brow furrows, his fingers trace condensation on the glass. The liquid inside glows faintly gold in candlelight. Everyone waits. The suspense feels eternal. Then, quietly, he declares his verdict, soft, measured, almost reverent. And though you can't tell whether he's right, you understand why this mattered. For a moment, knowledge felt possible. The body, the elements, the mind, they were all parts of one grand puzzle. As you leave that smoky chamber, your clothes cling faintly to the scent of vinegar and ash. Behind you, the alchemist stirs another mixture, chasing certainty through the fog of unknowing. You can't help but smile. Maybe the tests were nonsense, but the curiosity that was the first spark of science. You trudge back out into the cold air, only to find yourself drawn toward the village marketplace. No laboratory, no chapel, no midwife's hut this time. You probably won't survive this next part without a quiet laugh, because medieval pregnancy testing sometimes took on a public flavor where gossip, folklore, and performance blended into one noisy, chaotic ritual of observation. In an age when privacy was a luxury, even something as intimate as pregnancy could become a collective guessing game. Villagers, neighbors, even strangers thought they could see pregnancy before a woman herself could feel it. Historians still argue whether these so-called folk tests were genuine attempts at diagnosis or simply social theater meant to tease, reassure, or control. You walk through the bustling square, chickens scatter, merchants shout, and the smell of fresh bread mixes with that faint tang of manure. A woman passes, and instantly the gossip begins. She's glowing. No, her eyes look tired. She craves pickled onions again. People thought that subtle changes complexion, appetite, or even walking style betrayed the truth. It's both absurd and deeply human, this communal instinct to read bodies like open books. Some believed a pregnant woman's eyes gleamed more brightly, or her voice softened slightly. Others swore her breath carried a sweetness like ripe fruit. You can almost imagine someone leaning in just a little too close, sniffing curiously, prompting laughter or a sharp elbow. Humor thrives here because, in medieval towns, everything was both spectacle and story. If a woman stumbled, yawned too deeply, or craved salt, someone might mutter, "Aha, another little one on the way." And if she denied it, the denial itself became proof. The sensory world of these interactions was vivid smells, sounds, glances, and gestures, forming a social symphony of speculation. You sense how fragile privacy must have felt. Yet, strangely, these exchanges also built community. To be noticed, even through teasing, meant belonging. Sometimes folk tests involved playful experiments. A neighbor might drop a key on the ground and watch how a woman picked it up. She bent her knees, not her waist. They'd say she was pregnant. Others watched how she tied her apron, or whether she crossed her arms over her chest more often. Everyday movements turned into diagnostic performances. Historians still argue whether such behavioral reading carried any meaningful insight or simply reinforced gendered expectations about modesty and domesticity. And the humor never stopped. Imagine a farmer's wife deliberately picking up the key the wrong way, feigning shock as the crowd gasps dramatically, or a group of market women staging mock tests, laughing till their sides hurt. These were moments of collective release, gentle mockery wrapped in affection. Beneath the absurdity ran an undercurrent of genuine care. Pregnancy meant change for the entire community. Another mouth to feed, another worker, another future. Then there were food tests. Cravings were taken as omens. Vinegar meant a boy, honey meant a girl, or sometimes the opposite, depending on which village you asked. You can almost smell the vinegar, sharp and bright. As someone dips a finger in and jokes, "Guess we'll need more blankets." It's equal parts folklore and friendly mischief. And yet, amid the laughter, a quiet truth lingers. These folk rituals, as unscientific as they were, reflected the shared anxiety and anticipation that surrounded fertility and life. They gave everyone, from the woman herself to her gossiping neighbors, a role to play in deciphering fate. The market wasn't just an exchange of goods, it was an exchange of knowledge, rumor, and emotion. Imagine the woman returning home after a day of teasing. The echo of laughter trails her, but so does a strange comfort. The whole village, it seems, is invested in her secret. She may not have certainty, but she has community, and, in a world ruled by uncertainty, that might be worth more. Historians still argue whether these social rituals carried hidden medical wisdom, perhaps unconscious observation of early symptoms, or were purely performative. Either way, they offered a window into how medieval people understood bodies, not as private machines, but as shared narratives, woven through sight, scent, and speculation. As the marketplace fades into evening, torches flicker, smoke rises, and the crowd disperses. You stand there, listening to the fading laughter and the distant cluck of chickens, realizing that even the most ridiculous tests were part of something profound. They turned life's deepest uncertainty into something communal, a story everyone could tell, laugh about, and quietly believe in. You take one last look at the cobblestone square, glowing orange under the setting sun. The wind carries faint traces of laughter and the scent of roasted onions. Somewhere, a woman hums softly, touching her belly without realizing it. Maybe she believes, maybe she doesn't, but the ritual, the humor, and the shared humanity have already done their quiet work. You drift deeper into the candlelit corridors of time. The year is 1045, and the night wind is sweeping across the rugged cliffs of Mount Athos, a lonely peninsula in northern Greece. Below, the Aegean Sea sighs and murmurs like a restless sleeper. Above, the mountain stands dark and solemn, its jagged silhouette piercing the stars. You imagine yourself walking up the steep, rocky trail that leads to an isolated Byzantine monastery perched on the edge of the world. No towns, no markets, no laughter of children, only the deep silence of men who have chosen solitude over the world. Their lives move like the slow rhythm of a heartbeat, one prayer, one breath, one candle at a time. The monks here believe that the outside world, filled with greed, noise, and desire, distracts the soul from finding God. So they live as if time itself has stopped. No women are allowed to set foot on Athos, no music except the echo of chanting, no wealth except faith. You see them in your mind's eye, cloaked figures gliding through the narrow corridors, their faces half lit by flickering lamps. Their footsteps make no sound on the worn stone floors. The smell of incense and cold sea air lingers everywhere. At dawn, the great bell rings, slow, heavy, ancient. The sound rolls down the cliffs and over the sea. It calls the monks to Orthros, the morning prayer that can last for hours. Their voices rise together, deep, droning, like the humming of bees. It's hypnotic, almost like a dream you don't want to wake from. Then the day begins. They eat only bread, olives, and soup in silence. Each monk sits alone at the long wooden table, eyes downcast, listening to a single reader who recites from the scriptures. They don't speak, they don't look up. Their days are divided between manual labor and prayer, the rhythm of hands and hearts working in harmony. One monk tends to the olive trees that cling to the cliffside. Another copies ancient manuscripts, his quill scratching gently on parchment. A third weaves baskets from reeds gathered near the shore. Every act, no matter how small, is treated as sacred. Because here, time doesn't belong to men, it belongs to eternity. When evening comes, the sky turns purple and gold. The monks gather again in the chapel. You can almost hear the soft crackle of the oil lamps, the faint scent of beeswax candles. Their chants rise once more, echoing through the cold stone. Outside, the sea glows faintly beneath the moon. The wind whistles through the cypress trees, and you realize these men have not seen the world in decades. Some have never spoken to anyone outside the monastery walls. Yet they are at peace. They have traded comfort for clarity. A young novice, barely 20, kneels in the corner. He has left behind his family, his village, his dreams of ordinary life, all to find something he cannot name. He whispers, "Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy," over and over, until the words lose meaning and become pure sound. It is both haunting and beautiful. In the silence of Mount Athos, time is not measured by clocks. It is measured by prayers, by candles burned to the end, by breaths taken slowly and without hurry. You begin to feel sleepy again. The soft chanting fades into the distance, like waves dissolving on the shore. The monks continue their midnight prayers, unseen and unchanging, as the centuries drift past them like mist. Their world is still there, even now, untouched by modern noise, still whispering across 1,000 years of silence. And as your eyes grow heavy, you wonder, perhaps peace has always lived not in the noise of progress, but in the quiet heartbeat of those who choose to listen. The sea murmurs. The bell tolls once more, and you drift away, somewhere between the sound of waves and the sound of prayer. The dream doesn't end, it only shifts. The sound of the monks chanting fades into the soft hiss of wind. When you open your eyes, you're no longer on Mount Athos. You're standing in the Sahara Desert, under a sky painted with endless stars. The night is vast, ancient, and utterly still. The sand glows silver under the moonlight, and every grain seems to whisper stories older than history itself. Far away, a faint flicker of firelight. You walk toward it. Each step crunches softly against the sand. The wind carries a scent of dust and ink, something impossible, something sacred. You reach a cluster of mud brick buildings rising out of the dunes. This is Timbuktu, the legendary city of knowledge. 1,000 years ago, this place was not just a city, it was a beacon of learning, a desert lighthouse guiding travelers, traders, and thinkers from every corner of the known world. You step into a narrow street. The walls are the color of the sand itself, and the air is dry and heavy with silence. Somewhere nearby, a door creaks open. A man in flowing white robes gestures for you to follow. His eyes are calm, patient, like someone who has spent a lifetime listening to the quiet. He leads you into a library, though it doesn't look like one. There are no glowing lamps, no tall shelves. Instead, you find wooden chests and clay jars, each filled with delicate manuscripts wrapped in cloth. The air smells of dust and leather. You run your fingers along one. The parchment feels soft, fragile, almost alive. Each page is covered in Arabic script, written with ink, made from soot and desert plants. Some are golden with age, others still glisten faintly, as if the ink hasn't dried in 1,000 years. The old librarian lights a small oil lamp. The flame dances, throwing trembling shadows on the walls. He whispers, "These are our treasures, the books of our ancestors. We copied them when kingdoms fell, when empires burned, when the sands swallowed cities. The words survived, even when men did not." He opens one manuscript. It is a work of astronomy, describing how to measure the stars using the shadow of a palm tree. Another explains medicine, herbs, and healing. A third poetry, written by a Sufi mystic who once wandered these dunes in search of God. You listen. You can almost hear the faint scratch of quills from centuries past. Outside, the desert wind sighs against the walls. The librarian tells you that when the sun rises, the city will seem to disappear into the sand. But for now, in this fragile hour before dawn, Timbuktu is awake. You imagine hundreds of scholars, once sitting in these same rooms, under the same moon, sharing knowledge while the rest of the world slept. They believed that learning itself was a form of worship. To write, to read, to remember, these were holy acts. In your mind, you see the caravans that once crossed the Sahara, each camel carrying salt, gold, and books. The traders would stop here, not just to rest, but to exchange ideas. Philosophers debated under the stars. Mathematicians drew circles in the sand. Poets composed verses that shimmered like mirages. And though centuries have passed, something of that spirit remains hidden in the silence, waiting for those who still care to listen. The librarian closes the manuscript and smiles. "Every book," he says softly, "is a memory trying not to be forgotten." You realize the weight of that sentence. How fragile memory is, how easily it can vanish. One storm, one fire, one lost generation, and entire worlds of thought can disappear. You look around. The room feels like a tomb for wisdom, yet also a cradle. The manuscripts breathe quietly, as if asleep, dreaming of the people who once held them, read them, loved them. You sit beside the flickering lamp. The desert night hums with an invisible pulse. You feel an overwhelming stillness, a kind of peace that only comes when the noise of the world has been left far, far behind. The librarian begins to hum a low, tuneless melody, not a song, more like a prayer. You close your eyes. For a moment, it feels as though time itself bends. The whispers of old scholars, the creak of pens, the sigh of the wind, all blend into one long, slow breath. You drift between worlds, part of you still in this library of dust and memory, and part of you floating somewhere in the desert sky where the stars shimmer like golden ink dots on the parchment of the universe. The librarian gently covers the manuscripts with cloth again. "The world will forget," he murmurs, "but the sand remembers." He leads you outside. The horizon glows faintly, the first hint of dawn. The desert stretches endlessly before you, calm and infinite. You can almost hear the echo of footsteps from those who once carried these books across the dunes, each step a promise that knowledge would not die. As the first light of day touches the sand, the library fades behind you, like a dream dissolving in morning light. You take one last look back, but there is nothing now, only desert. The wind has erased your footprints, and as you walk onward, the memory of Timbuktu lingers, a city of silence, a city that taught the world, then disappeared into the dust. The sun rises higher, the heat begins to shimmer. The world grows bright, and your eyelids grow heavy again. Somewhere, in another time, the monks of Mount Athos are still praying. And here, under this same ancient sun, the desert still whispers the stories of the books it once kept safe. You close your eyes, the wind hums softly, steady, eternal, and the sand sings you back to sleep. The desert dissolves, as if the wind itself decides you've wandered far enough. Your next breath tastes of salt. Somewhere, waves are breaking, slow, rhythmic, eternal. You open your eyes to find yourself standing on the edge of a vast, gray-green sea. The horizon melts into mist, and the air hums with the low, endless murmur of water meeting shore. You're no longer in the desert of Timbuktu. You're standing at the edge of a memory drowned by time. The sand beneath your feet is darker now, cool, damp, alive with the faint shimmer of sea foam. The wind carries whispers from beneath the surface, echoes of bells, the faint chime of something metallic, the deep sigh of ruins sleeping below. They call this place the Forgotten Kingdom beneath the waves. Once, perhaps, it had a name, a city that thrived when empires on land were still learning how to build. Its streets, they say, were paved with coral and pearl. Its people traded shells as currency and built temples from bones of whales. You start walking toward the water. Each step sinks a little deeper. The waves curl around your ankles, cool, steady, pulsing. The air smells of salt and mystery. As you look out across the sea, a ghostly light glows beneath the waves. At first, it's faint, then brighter, like a lantern flickering alive under glass. You kneel, peer closer. For a heartbeat, you see it, the outline of arches, towers, and walls, all glimmering faintly in the murky depths. The city is real. Or maybe you're dreaming again. You wade in. The water rises to your knees, your waist, your chest. The world above grows dim, muted. The world below glows. And then you're swimming through silence. Beneath you, roads of stone stretch out like ribs of an ancient creature. A cracked amphitheater yawns open, half filled with seaweed and sand. Fish drift lazily through empty doorways. Shells cling to broken statues, whose faces have been erased by centuries of tide. There's something heartbreakingly peaceful about it, the way ruin becomes beauty, the way decay turns into life again. Historians still argue whether this kingdom ever existed, whether it was Atlantis, or Cantra Gweled from Welsh legend, or one of the many lost cities swallowed by the sea. Some say it's just a metaphor, a warning carved into our myths about human pride. Others whisper that under every ocean lies a forgotten civilization, erased not by punishment, but by indifference. You float there, listening to the hum of the deep. Somewhere, a bell tolls, not loudly, but faintly, like a sound that traveled too far and arrived centuries late. You imagine the last day of the city, the tide creeping higher, unnoticed, merchants closing their stalls, unaware the sea is coming for them, children laughing as waves lap at the steps of marble houses, the priests ringing bells, praying for calm weather, not knowing they were calling their own requiem. You picture a woman standing on a balcony, watching the horizon darken. The air tastes wrong, she thinks, heavy, electric. She reaches for her child, and then the sea rises like a living thing. When the storm hits, it's not thunder that shakes the earth. It's the sound of memory being erased. But time is gentle. even to ruins. Centuries later, coral grows where houses once stood. Fish drift where people once walked. The sea writes over everything in soft blue ink. You swim through an archway carved with symbols too old to read. Inside, a mosaic covers the floor, tiny stones forming the image of a woman holding the moon in her hands. The tiles are faded, cracked, yet somehow still luminous. You reach out, touch the stones. They're cool beneath your fingers. Tiny air bubbles escape, drifting upward like lost words. There is something hauntingly familiar in the silence, as if the city still remembers what it once was. The streets hum faintly, the same way old records do when the music has long stopped. You think of all the knowledge that drowned here, the songs, the language, the recipes, the laughter, the stories people once told each other before sleep. And you wonder, maybe this is what happens to all civilizations. Not destruction, not punishment, just a slow, graceful sinking into forgetfulness. The ocean doesn't erase, it preserves. Beneath the silt and salt, the city waits. And maybe, one day, when the tides change again, it will rise, not as stone and brick, but as memory, retold through stories like this. You turn upward. The light above seems far, but not unreachable. You swim toward it, slowly, gently, as if afraid to disturb the peace below. The surface breaks around you with a sigh. The world above is pale with dawn. The sea stretches endlessly, calm and indifferent. You float on your back. The sky burns pink and gold. The wind brushes your face. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cries, the first sound of morning. The desert, the monasteries, the libraries, all feel like distant dreams now, blending into one soft memory. You realize that this entire journey, from the candlelit scriptoriums to the drowned city, was never really about the places themselves. It was about what survives, not the stone, not the walls, but the stories. Every word, every song, every whispered legend, they are the real cities that never sink. You close your eyes. The sea rocks you gently, like a cradle. The hum of the waves becomes a heartbeat. And slowly, beautifully, the line between waking and dreaming fades. Your breathing slows. The sea around you glimmers like molten glass. The sun has climbed just enough to warm your face. You don't need to move now, just float. Let the waves carry you. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat melts into the rhythm of the tide. The voices of the past, the monks, the librarians, the traders, the poets, all fade into a single soothing whisper. You realize they were never gone. They were always here, murmuring beneath the noise of the world, waiting for quiet souls to listen. You've wandered through deserts, through libraries of dust, through cathedrals of coral, and found that every lost place holds the same truth. Nothing truly disappears. It only changes shape. The sand becomes glass. The ruins become reefs. The memories become stories. And tonight, you've carried them one step further by simply listening. The sea sighs softly. The air is warm. Somewhere, a faint echo of that underwater bell tolls one last time, slow and deep. A lullaby for civilizations past. Your eyelids grow heavy. The world softens into a blur of light and sound. Sleep now. Let the waves erase your footprints, too. Tomorrow, when you wake, you won't remember every detail, but somewhere inside, a piece of the story will stay quiet, steady, like a hidden current beneath your thoughts. Because history never dies, it just dreams. Sweet dreams.